as my colleague was saying uh, about critical thinking, and critical thinking involves reflection. Uh, what I'm interested in is uh, not in terms of bridging a gap between theory and practice, but to tell the outer world there that theory is nothing. Theory is what we do. It is an analysis of what we do. So, like, and I'm also interested in how Foucault's formulation of disability as well as medicine could be useful uh, to create a, a positive imagery among disabled themselves, as I also observed in my field work that somewhere down the line, uh, disabled colleagues of mine or respondents of mine are trying very hard to remain in the mainstream. Okay, in fact, they are utilizing different terminologies to address themselves, such as differently abled and everything, just to get that acceptance. But deep down, there is a negative imagery which they have probably internalized. Like during my field work, when I was addressing uh, like disabled as it is, one of my respondent asked, "Why are you using this terminology? Why aren't you using differently abled?" Uh, so, and then I was trying to tell him that, see, if you are, if you are bargaining something from the state, you have to, you have to utilize tools given by those who are involved, who are e- engaging in identity politics per se, vis-a-vis disability. Uh, like, uh, like just to give a brief history of it, in 1960s and 70s, there was a disability movement in UK and US where uh, it was it was called uh, British disability movement was very much within the structures of social model of disability, which I would explain you shortly. Uh, in America, it is all about independent living. So, what happened in Britain? Uh, People like Michael Oliver, a celebrated sociologist, uh, utilized uh, in terms of uh, utilized reflexive sociology to articulate his point that disability and impairment are two different things. They are not same. Disability is social exclusion of persons who are impaired by this non-disabled friendly society. We are disabled because society is not organized to accommodate us. It is created by non-disabled. And in America, what they did, uh, uh, like disabled activists did not make such distinction between disability and impairment, but they said uh, they they recognize that exclusion is primarily uh, located in the society, and they asked state state for better services. So uh, this is the point from where I want to develop a full-fledged idea or paper where I want to uh, I want to argue that theory is nothing but what we do, and through Foucault, through my reading of Foucault, let's say in Birth of Clinic, or let's say in Madness and Civilization, if Foucault is arguing that disability is nothing but a discursive construct, and then here, on the other hand, there are disability scholar or activist who argues about identity politics. So on one hand, Foucault is in a way destabilizing the category of disability. On the other hand, those who are into activism are basically making use of their being to to get probably better services, or to uh, be mainstreamed at par with anybody else. So what my idea is, in a way, as in as of now, I'm thinking of utilizing, uh, and I need suggestions from you guys also. Like, I'm thinking of utilizing life stories of disabled, upon which I am working. As in, my method is life history for my PhD. But I want to utilize life history to tell, probably quote unquote commoners, if I may say so, to tell them that, see, this is the life history of probably uh, A, B, C, D person, and we could analyze it from utilizing critical thinkers such as postmodern postmodern philosophers such as Foucault to uh, tell the word out there that uh, the stigmatized identity which disabled carry uh, throughout uh, is something we can do away with, if probably I can make them aware about Foucauldian discourses. Yes, it is very well to argue for about or for identity politics, but as in US and America, probably state is also very much involved or interactive in terms of providing at least some sort of assistance or something. But here uh, in India, like, probably because we are not considered as vote banks. So things they do out of charity. So like, on a personal note, if I can say, if I may share, like, as a student, uh, like, I graduated, like, I did my master's from Delhi School of Economics, and now I'm in JNU. Uh, People, people do ask me things and do tell me that Samir, you are very good, you are fantastic, you are this, you are that. But none of the, especially none of my female colleagues have ever asked me out. Okay, so if we could utilize Foucault, ask me out in terms of dating and all. So if we can utilize Foucault uh, to tell them how this civilization is very much constructed. So probably we could achieve wider wider destigmatization, uh, and probably we would then embrace quote unquote physical differences in a more positive way. So that is my submission. So it was like I haven't written anything, so I'm sorry for that. So yeah, I would like to rest my case here. Thank you.
Yeah. I'll come back to what Samir was saying before. I mean, when we go to the discussion, because I can very much understand his well. I present a portion of my research from my PhD thesis in Calcutta. Uh, it's basically Foucault's take on the establishment called prison. So I'll just come to it. I'll start with an epigraph. Knowledge and power are integrated with one another, and there's no point in dreaming of a time when knowledge will cease to depend on power. This is just a way of reviving humanism in a utopian guise. It is not possible for power to be exercised without knowledge. It is impossible for knowledge not to engender power. Foucault says this in his famous On Knowledge interview. Now, modern societies as such exist through a series of exclusions, which my friends have just spoken about. The exclusion of bad from the good, the abnormal from the normal, the uncivilized from the civilized, and the delinquent from the disciplined. None of these are natural, these are all constructs. Such a network of exclusions play a key role in maintaining what those who create these exclusions call the balance of society. It is their term. This balance, often called social order, although thought to be a collective responsibility, is to be actually ensured by the state as far as modern societies are concerned. The state, which replaced the sovereign in the democratic framework, came up with the mechanisms that would maintain the status of what it acts upon, thereby keeping its own existence safe. Now, in the entire process, ideas and praxis underwent crucial changes. The visibility of authority is what changed the most. With the emergence of the state, authority did not vanish altogether. On the contrary, it became more authoritative and powerful in ways in always being a hidden force. Hence, authority exists and evades its existence at once in modern societies. Authority covers itself up with the responsibility of maintaining societal order. It does away with the physical force that was the means of assertion that earlier systems had used, which both the scattered authority in the feudal system and the central authority which emerged during the Middle Ages in Europe resorted to. The most powerful of all the methods of schemes that state or even the sovereign before it used to safeguard its position was law. Law was as a set of instructions or codes of social conduct which is enacted through the judicial system and the mechanics of punishment is what allows the continued functioning of the state. Now, this ideal often projects itself as a central factor that is responsible for the peaceful living of individuals and the maintenance of societal balance. While it envisages upholding social order, it actually enacts state order. It envisages upholding social order, but it actually enacts state order. The most influential and powerful helping mechanism for the reign of law in modern societies is the institution called prison. A prison is not a modern invention. It can be traced back to prehistoric times. in different forms of its existence. But the evolution of prison into the system that it is today is as complex as that of the state or a society that is controlled and maintained by law, and hence it is an obvious complexity. Now, it is as complex as the evolution of the society or the state in itself. Now, there are lots of takes on the institution of prison or the history of the prison. Lots of academic activities going on in the latter part of the 20th century, and how prison evolved as a central punitive mechanism, where the first thing that comes to the mind of the common conscience when you think of punishment is prison these days. When you think of punishment in terms of legality, then you think of prison. Yeah, one of the most influential, though not the first work on the evolution of prison is Michel Foucault's Discipline and Punishment. Ever since it was published in French, the year 1975, the book has been a seminal part of any academic discussion in prison. A reach which widened with the appearance of the English translation in 1977. Foucault presents a complex analysis of the birth of prison and puts forward his arguments as to how prison replaced all the correctional systems that existed prior to it and became the icon of the punitive. The focus of the book is on the 18th and 19th centuries, when public display of punishment slowly started disappearing, favoring a more concealed form of punishment called discipline. It is only towards the end of the book that we find Foucault focus on the discussion of actual prison or penitentiary, as he finds the completion of the carceral system on 22nd January 1840, the date of the official opening of the metairie. But to reach this point, the system of punishment did travel a long way, passing through a series of duplication and substitution, subjecting itself to diverse sources and systems of power. Foucault offers a glimpse into the form of punishment as it existed in Europe before the advent of the carceral system in the opening chapters of the book. Corporal punishment, which focused on inflicting pain and that too in public, was the key form in which justice acted upon the people. The dual purpose of law becomes evident. When the offender is tortured to the highest possible degree and his body is broken apart into several pieces, the law not only enacts its might upon him, but also exhibits what it can do, thereby attempting the erasure of criminal tendencies from the minds of the subjects. These are not to be taken for granted as such. It was a visible enforcement of law which intended to concretize legal supremacy each time it was practiced. The fear that was generated among the people was supposed to keep them off violating the legal norms. Thus, in turn, sought to solidify the authority of the sovereign or the state. This torture centered approach to punishment was what the prison system replaced by the end of the 19th century. This was not a simple transition from one form of punishment into another, but a complex shift from a single phased enactment of power into a network of discourses where power administered itself in every form and structure. To sum up this complexity into its shortest would be to say that the body was replaced by the soul as the central focal point of punitive activity. Now, Foucault himself has argued the history of this microphysics of punitive power. This is where I quote: the history of this microphysics of the punitive power would then be a genealogy or an element in a genealogy of the modern soul. So from physical, punishment to a kind of a mental or on a higher level, so-called high level. The end of the gloomy festival of punishment, this is what Foucault calls the corporal punishment, led to the punishment leaving the domain of everyday perception and entering into an abstraction, where its effectiveness was a result not of its horrifying spectacle, but the fact that punishment was inevitable. Punishment moved from a terrible visual into an unseen fear. This shift introduced several additional factors into the scenario of punishment. All these new interventions can together be termed technologies of power. And this is a very, very central point that Foucault makes in his work. that the technologies of power that aid the punitive justice. The new mechanisms of power resulted in justice furthering itself out from the domains of the actual practice of what is preached. Passing the sentence was the final act of the judge, and beyond this, the practice of it was handed over to the new set of extrajudicial establishments. So the judge stopped where the judgment was passed. Judiciary in the modern society, uh, in the period between the late 18th and the early 19th centuries, which Foucault considers as a key for reforms in various spheres of social activity, is not ready to burden itself with the shame of execution. Now, Foucault says, I quote, now the scandal and the like are to be distributed differently. It is the conviction itself that marks the offender with the unequivocally negative sign. The publicity has shifted to trial and to the sentence. The execution itself is like an additional shame that justice is ashamed to impose on the condemned man. So, it keeps its distance from the act, tending always to entrust it to others under the seal of secrecy. It is ugly to be punishable, but there is no glory in punishing. This is from Discipline and Punish, pages 9 and 10. Now, hence, new technologies arrive into penal justice, bureaucrats and psychiatrists. The bureaucrats include magistrates, educationalists, and prison service personnel who all fragment the legal service to punish. Psychiatrists, who in no way seem related to the legal structure, are the most dubious entrants of all. What exactly is the role that they play? Foucault says that the individual, which is now an entity different from the body that it represents, becomes a matter of not just direct legal action, but also of a sociological investigation. The basic question that is asked is directly related to the so-called danger that he is said to pose for the society. Elsewhere, Foucault details the concept of the dangerous individual in an essay titled About the concept of dangerous individual in 19th century legal. It is within this notion of the individual being a danger to the social functioning that the psychiatrists place themselves within the penal process. They and the other extrajudicial judicial mechanisms are never integrated into the judicial system itself. They are different. They are outside mechanism. Now, the authority to sentence is always vested with the judiciary, wherein the psychiatrists act as advisors on how punishable is the individual and to what degree is his or her soul corrigible. Foucault says the psychiatrist is, quote, not an expert in responsibility, but an advisor on punishment. It is up to him to say whether the subject is dangerous, in what way one should be protected from him, how one should intervene to alter him, whether it would be better to try to force him into submission or to treat him. Thus, punishment becomes a matter of the human sciences as much as it is a legal discourse. The power to punish is justified by the newly emerged corpus of knowledge, techniques, scientific discourses. Unquote. Foucault approaches the birth of the present from different angles, the basis of all which remains the replacement of the crime with the individual, the man, or the soul. The analysis of the genealogy of punishment which he undertakes presents an evolution or transformation of the punitive methods with a new interest in the political technology of the body. Approaching penal leniency for Foucault is to reveal the way in which techniques of power make the individual or the so-called dangerous individual duplicate crime, quote unquote, as objects of penal intervention, whereby man becomes an object for a discourse with a scientific status. The entire socio-juridical elaboration on the evolution of modern punitive system is centered on a body politic which becomes the arena of interaction for power relations and the technologies of power. Punishment is regarded as a complex social function and a political tactic which derives from the process of epistemological juridical formation. Penalty justified itself with its economy of being selective and precise. The modern juridical practice called prison and later the penitentiary as a central mechanism of punitive action through a series of major shifts in its approach. The disappearance of the spectacle of punishment and the entrance of the extrajuridical mechanisms mentioned above were measures that resulted from or aided this shift in perspective. The two major concepts that contributed to the development of the new systems were those of discipline and surveillance. These two form part of the discourse on human knowledge that put the new power mechanisms into action. Power mechanics used a series of measures for controlling the ways in which the forces of the body operated, making them docile and utilizing them for the empowerment of the same mechanisms. Now, there is a constant subjection that plays in this disciplining domain, a subjection that not only increases the efficiency of the body but also constrains it to specific tracks. Such a disciplining of the body was not new to the 18th century Europe, or it was not an invention of that period. But what interests Foucault are the new elements in the political anatomy of the docile bodies in that period. The exercise of discipline acted on the body individually, uplifting efficiency with economy and internal organization of the body. There was an interrupted and constant coercion that supervised the process of the activity. So the scale of control, object of control, and the modality that all new to the emergent system of disciplining process. Though the disciplinary methods existed in institutions such as monasteries, armies, and workshops before the 18th century, quote unquote, disciplines became general formulas of domination. The historical moment of the disciplines for Foucault is when an art of human body was born, which was directed, quote, at the formation of a relation that in the mechanism itself makes it more obedient as it becomes more useful and converse.